Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Well, look who we've got here, Stu.
Oh, no. Hi, Maurice. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Stuart. Very well, Lorraine. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Well, Conveyancing Matters, delighted to welcome you back, Maurice Kilbride, friend of the show, as they say. Really delighted to have you back. Lovely to see you. And Maurice, we thought, well, perhaps for the benefit of the two people watching that don't know who you are and what you do, just give us a little brief thumbnail. I know you did that last time, but let's just tell people who you are, and then we'll shoot the breeze for 20 minutes about 2021 and perhaps a little bit about 2022.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Lorraine. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Maurice Kilbride. I run a small independent estate agency in Cheadle, South Manchester. This is our 21st year. Prior to that, I was a director of Countrywide for my sins, and I ran the Cheshire and South Manchester area for a number of years for them. And I've been in the estate agency now for coming on to 30 years since I left university. So I don't know anything else. So I'm sort of really limited on my options if estate agency goes pear-shaped, because I haven't done anything else. Although I think, as I probably mentioned last time, I did train or study to be a journalist. So maybe that's what I will be if I have to fall back in the future.
Oh, well, I don't think you will, Maurice, but I'm not sure, actually. Just a tiny cul-de-sac to start with that I'd like to drive us down. Just remind me, Maurice, in case you didn't tell us last time, why did you decide to, as a young man, to sort of jump ship from the sort of maybe the seemingly the top of the tree at Countrywide and set up on your own? Because that's probably the biggest leap that somebody in your business can make.
Yeah, it was a massive decision at the time as well, because my wife was pregnant with our second child, who now Josie, works for us.
Yes.
It seems bizarre, it was a big decision to go from a extremely well-paid job to setting up from nothing. But I was getting very little job satisfaction, if I'm honest. We were spending all our time recruiting people. We were losing people hand over fist. The policies weren't great. The staff retention was awful. The morale wasn't great. I don't think much has changed by all accounts either, from what I can gather. It just wasn't something I felt, sort of aligned with my thinking. And I just felt, a lot of people say, if you think you can do it better, go and do it yourself, but they won't. They're quick to criticise and say things, but they won't go and stand on their own 2 feet. And I just felt I had to get out of that environment. And, I don't think I was cool, but I had too much to say for myself. So I'd have probably got pushed if I hadn't gone anyway. So I just knew I was probably better working for myself and doing things the way that I would want to do them. Although I was incredibly grateful for the training and the things that they do really well, but there were things that they didn't do quite so well. And I still watch them very closely. And as I say, things don't seem to have changed greatly.
It's interesting, isn't it? I have to say, actually, Maurice, you might be interested to know. I think the one thing that binds me and everybody I'm close to together, and I think I would include Mr. Forsback on that list, really, is that essentially anybody I get on really well with is essentially unemployable, because to some degree or another, we all work for ourselves. And as I say, I can say that of the people I'm very close to, some of my longest standing friends, my best friends since I've, for 40 years, it's somebody, another lovely friend who's got a training company. Everybody I'm close to is pretty much works for themselves, or is at a sufficiently high level that they might as well be. And certainly you're in that camp, Stu.
Oh, most definitely.
I'd be a brilliant employee. I don't know why you're saying that. I would be a brilliant employee.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I would.
How funny. So Maurice, well, that's interesting. So thank you for that. As I say, I couldn't remember whether we'd taken that little cul-de-sac, that little detour down that cul-de-sac before, but I am always interested to know what makes people jump. And it's interesting that it's often the just couldn't deal with the corporate stuff. And you can always see how you would want to do it differently, I think. And do you think you've done that, Maurice, actually, interestingly?
Yes, I think so. Obviously, I like to think I took a lot of the good out of countrywide, and there were some very good things, some excellent people in there. The training was exceptional. So, you know, they do train people very, very well. It's unfortunate after that perhaps things aren't quite as good. So I took a lot of what I'd learned into, you know, working for myself, but just with a slightly softer face, I would like to think, and doing things less aggressively. You know, it's very aggressive, very in your face, the way that the corporates work. And it's probably similar to the corporate solicitors. But it really was the case with Breachfords, who was part of the group that I work for here. And, you know, it just wasn't how I saw agency being done. It's one way to do it, and that's the way the corporates do it. I'm more about the people and empathy and understanding and trying to help the journey right from start to finish. It was just a different way of thinking, but there was some brilliant stuff that I learned there that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't worked there. So I'm very grateful for that.
It's interesting, Stu, we say that all the time, but people seem to forget with all of the, you know, proliferation of prop tech and goodness knows what else. I mean, Stu and I say this a lot, Maurice, but it's a people job, Stu, isn't it?
Oh, massively. You know, we get sort of punted prop tech all the time, and one of the sort of party lines is that, you know, we can reduce the head count of your staff and blah, 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 and all that kind of thing. But, you know, if we take on any tech, it's always to aid the service. It's never to get rid of or reduce staff levels, because nothing ever picks, you know, or replaces, you know, picking up that phone and talking to clients and building relationships, which I think that's what it's all about. If you're not one of those corporates, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
So, Maurice, come on. I can't believe that we're almost at the end of 2021. I don't know. We're in this strange sort of, I feel like we're in this strange time machine where time just kind of slips away and you don't notice. So how have you, perhaps a ridiculous question, but Stu and I have talked a lot about 2021 for conveyancers and just how terrible most of it's been, just because of the volumes of work. And, you know, we did talk about the sort of abuse that conveyancers were taking in a lot of cases. So, you know, how was it for you, Maurice?
I think the best way of summing up 2021, Lorraine, is that it's been a roller coaster.
Yeah.
An absolute roller coaster from a business point of view. It started off phenomenally well from the back end of 2019 into 2020. Start of 2021 has been really, you know, was phenomenal for a estate agency. We had record sales, record numbers of properties, record numbers of buyers, fighting over properties going over asking price. As you say, solicitors unable to cope with the volume. It was crazy. And then it got to the end of the first stamp duty window, holiday window in June. And it sort of didn't take a massive dip. And then it got to the second one in September, when they went back to pre-COVID stamp duty levels. And it's been as dead as a doornail for us since then, in terms of new business and volumes of properties coming to the market. They've dropped off a cliff. And I think that's pretty much nationwide from what I'm hearing and seeing and reading. So 2022, or the start of 2022, is going to be rather strange, I suspect, because, as I say, we've gone from the highs to the lows, and there doesn't seem to have been anything in between. It's been a really bizarre year.
This was always going to happen, wasn't it? And this is the criticism maybe of the stamp duty holiday. It was always going to create that kind of cliff edge, is a term that everyone's used, but it was always going to create this big lull after, wasn't it? And that was always the fear, I think.
It is, and I think that the problem was that, and it's sort of created a vicious circle. I mean, we had all this where people were trying to take advantage, although the irony is, with the way house prices went up, the savings probably weren't that great, really. They convinced themselves they were getting a huge saving with the stamp duty, but they were paying considerably more, you know, money when prices were going up on average, I think 13% over the year. So it's been, you know, sort of very mixed in that sense. But then, of course, we got to a sort of a catch-22 situation where there was no houses available, so people wouldn't put the house on the market because there was nothing for them to buy.
Yeah.
So it's a self-perpetuating circle that somehow has got to break, and I'm not sure what's going to break that, to be honest. That's where I'm at.
That's interesting. And sorry, go on, Stu.
It is quite concerning because you're right, Maurice. It's something I hear geographically everywhere. We do conveyancing all over the UK, and all agents are saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, our stock level is at a record low. It's the worst I've had it for 15 years, only because we've sold everything. And as soon as something comes on the market, it's selling because you have got so little stock. So you can't build up your stock reserves to have more selection of properties. So it's still creating this sort of false situation that I see of where people think the market's really, really good just because there's so few around. We put a house on the market on Thursday lunchtime. By Thursday evening, we'd have 30 phone calls to book viewings. We'd filled 2 open house events this week straight away, and another 20 email inquiries we've not even had a chance to go through because we were fending off the phone calls all day. So, and you know, it was just an average 2-bedroom terrace house. It was nothing, you know, outstanding about it. So it just shows that anything coming to the market is creating a real furor, but there just isn't the volume of stuff, and it is right across the board.
Yeah.
So do we think then that, you know, a potential, and I hate to use the L word, but we were talking about this off air, weren't we? I mean, we've at the time we're recording this, we've just started to creep into, well, we're in plan B now with you know, Omicron, more, you know, masks, you know, etc., work from home if you can. You know, I think we all agree the general rather pessimistic consensus is we might be, you know, back in some form of lockdown early in the new year. Do we, I mean, might that be a strange sort of, a strange fire break that might mean when we come out of that, we, you know, the market almost recalibrates a bit, Maurice? What do you think?
Well, if it follows a similar pattern to the original lockdown, yeah, because when the first lockdown happened, none of us knew what to expect.
Yeah.
It was quite frightening because I think everybody thought, crikey, from a business perspective, what's going to happen? We'll have no business because we're all going to be stuck indoors. But what it did, weirdly, was it forced people to sort of reevaluate what they wanted out of life. Did they want more outside space because they were stuck in their homes? People might be working from home permanently now, so they needed another room to maybe make as an office. And you know, sort of people were finding if they were spending that much time together, sadly, maybe the relationships were showing signs of strains as well. So there was a lot of reasons why people decided to sell and move house, because it was one of the few things you could actually do. You couldn't go and visit anybody, but you could go and view a house.
Yes.
Bizarrely, you know, people seemed to jump on that bandwagon, and everybody was selling and moving despite the difficulties around. So it could very much follow a similar pattern again. If we do go into, and hopefully we don't, but we you know, as you say, the signs are, I wouldn't say particularly encouraging, but we would, if we do go into another lockdown, maybe it will have a similar effect again.
I think this is the big question, isn't it? It's, you know, all the difficulties. Did the SDLT holiday cloud that scenario? So have we just pulled through a big pipeline? You know, if we'd left it without the SDLT holiday, would people's natural thought about moving been exactly as you've described, Maurice? Or was a proportion of that because of the SDLT? And that's where I'm quite not 100% sure, you know. And you'd like to think, you know, people that were living in flats, they wanted a house, like you say, people needed extra room, or even people that are stuck in sort of bigger houses might wanted to downsize.
Sure.
So there are so many reasons why property became, you know, at the forefront of your thinking process. But how long would that have lasted, and to what extent? Or was the SDLT that he shortly brought in after the catalyst? And that's where I'm not sure. And then going forward to next year, you know, I think the one thing that is certain about next year is the demand for property is so strong still that prices are going to remain as they are. I can't see any price dip or anything of that magnitude, but who knows?
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, Rightmove have just announced their latest statistics, and it's funny that there's sort of mixed messages going around at the moment, because I think when I looked this morning, because I thought I better be prepared for coming on, look as though I'm, you know, on top of my figures here. 5 of the 11 regions have shown price increases over the last month, but 6 have shown price reductions. So it's sort of around the country, there's mixed messaging, and Rightmove are predicting a 5% price increase next year. So they're being quite sort of conservative with their predictions. I've learned from experience, to be a bit like a politician, be very vague about what I'm predicting for next year, because you just don't know. I mean, nobody expected what we've had this last 12 months. But I think you're right. While the supply remains low, it's the old economic situation, isn't it? You know, supply and demand. If the demand is still there, and I think there are a couple of factors that could affect that. Obviously, we're going to get some huge increases in fuel bills by next April, and when they start really hitting home, the massive increases in costs. So that's going to put a strain on people's finances. If interest rates go up, which nobody's seen for a long, long time, what effect that could potentially have on the market and people's thinking. There could be people forced to sell next year if finances are incredibly difficult for people. So you might see more people trying to reduce some costs. Therefore, there could be more properties coming to the market, and that can have a dampening effect on prices. But it's all speculation. I don't think anybody knows with these coronavirus is still lingering, and this situation sort of gathering momentum again and looking very similar to what we've been through before. You just don't know, Stuart. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to predict.
I think you're right, actually, on the sort of the increase on family finances, and of course with the tax rises coming through that are going to come through. I have to say, I think actually, I'm thinking about what you've just said, Maurice. I actually think probably that, this time next year is going to be the latter end of 2022 is going to be harder, because of course increase in fuel costs and so on isn't really going to hit home until much later in the year, in reality, because that's where the demand will be. So I think we might almost sail a bit through sort of spring and summer, and some of the bigger hits aren't going to happen until perhaps later in the year. I mean, I hope that they don't. But I think you're absolutely right. We have to be realistic and say that they will. Maurice, actually, I'm interested to know, this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, really. Have you noticed, and again, really because of, your geographical location, have you noticed sort of chains and difficulties, in relation to, chains falling down, or, property transactions falling through because of, flats and the cladding crisis? Because Manchester's been known as a bit of a sort of hotbed for high-rise cladded flats. So I think that's just a tragedy for people, and I'm really interested to know how you're finding it on the ground.
I mean, I'm a big, you probably know because we follow each other on social media. Yeah. I'm a big critic of the government on the handling of the cladding crisis and their lack of action, and leaving leaseholders to be footing the bills for problems that have no making of their own is absolutely shocking. So we've seen it here in Manchester. It's been difficult to get mortgages on properties there. The underwriters are turning their nose up at these properties. It's a nightmare, and as I say, I feel for the people who bought flats, but we've seen it particularly because we work with a lot of new home builders in town, and we do a lot of rentals. But you can get away with the rentals, but even there, they shouldn't be, unless these buildings are safe. They should not be either selling them or renting them, in my opinion. That's how I see it. And some of the horror stories that we've all witnessed about people's life savings being taken to pay for these cladding issues. It's just bang out of order. I'm sorry.
I think it's extraordinary. I mean, I think it's just, the real, and I hate, it sounds a bit of a hyperbole, but, it is the real tragedy and travesty, really, of our time, I think. And what I feel so terrible for, is that, I mean, to be fair to Gove, and I say this with no political hat on at all, but I mean, at least he has put a stop to, the roller coaster of, should leaseholders be taking low value loans? No, they shouldn't. But of course, I still think, the government has got to do something quickly. And of course, the poor people who've already dipped into their savings, who've already spent everything they've got, what recourse are those poor sods going to have? I mean, I just feel, really terrible for them. But Stu, I mean, from a practical point of view, when you're you and your colleagues are, faced with a property. I mean, are you finding you're giving the cladding advice in the sense that, it's cladded, don't buy it, and you're telling the buyer and you're telling the lender and people are walking away, or do you advise people not to proceed? How's it going on the ground?
Not generally, insofar as what you tend to find is the properties don't get that far. We tend to find that, they're not sold in the first place, or the bank's valuation means that the banks won't lend on it, or when the banks survey, so we tend to find that it doesn't really get that far in the first place. I don't think sort of matters are getting to a point of being anywhere near an exchange before the cladding issue comes up, so they're sort of kind of weeded out very early in the conveyancing process, if it even gets that far. So not practically, no, it's not really something we see a massive amount of.
It's interesting because I get queries, obviously, with my sort of trainer hat on, and I've done, a couple of webinars and bits and bobs on, the EWS 1 certificates and all the rest of it. And funnily enough, I do get lawyers getting in touch saying, oh, we've got this certificate, and what do you think we need to do with it? And so it is a bit of a sort of a bit of a mixed message. I mean, I wonder whether
you do they obviously come up, but in terms of them going abortive, or matter going abortive, it tends to be at that earlier stage. So I wouldn't say it's a mass, I don't see masses of transactions getting to an advanced stage and then proving abortive as a generalization because of the cladding. It tends to be that they're weeded out fairly early. Obviously there are still some, and it's just such a difficult one, because we're now again talking about stuff that's kind of outside our remit. It's something to do with the build of a property, and we're then kind of being pulled into it again, and asked, effectively to advise on something that really is completely out of our jurisdiction.
And we shouldn't be. Maurice, do you actually, as a matter of interest from your side of the fence, clearly you've been in your area, as you say, you've been, running your own business for 21 years, so you know your area very well. I mean, do you actually not take a flat on if it's in a building that has got these problems?
I wouldn't touch it. No, absolutely. As soon as I look at a building, I would walk away from properties that I was not comfortable selling. I don't want to be selling a death trap or potential one, and I think there is an onus on the builders. I think they are now, the new build are a lot more careful, the brand new build, because obviously the regulations have changed and the rules and such like. So as to what they can use, the materials and things. So, but luckily for us, where I am in Cheadle anyway, there's very few flats. Once you go into Manchester, there's a lot more, and that's where, as I say, we do sell them to overseas buyers more. But as Stuart says, we don't see many. I mean, I think they've had so much bad press that there's not many first-time buyers buying flats anyway now. They're steering clear of them with that, and the cladding issues and the leasehold issues as well. With these incremental leases, thankfully the government are addressing that as well. I think that flats are just not particularly an attractive proposition to first-time buyers.
I've wondered for years whether they are, to be quite honest with you. Not wishing. My dad's a great predictor after the event, Maurice, so I try really hard not to do it. But I have to say, for a really long time, I've thought, oh, really, But what I find sort of irritating is that, not wishing to sort of put them all in the same basket, but quite often the developers will only do something when they're sort of forced to do something or faced with some form of sanction, but which I do find just generally irritating. But I do think that quite a lot of the market is sort of hanging some hope on the big government reforms. Well, one, they'll keep them in the long grass for as long as they can. And I don't think anybody really thinks about some of it could be very complex, and I can't imagine that it's going to be retrospective. That, I think, is the thing. So we're still potentially going to have, and even if it is retrospective, well, every single lease that needed changing will need a deed of variation to change it, right. Which hopefully, might mean a lot of work for Stu and his colleagues. But this idea that there's just going to be this magic wand and two sections in the statute is going to, put right all of the problems in the leasehold market, I think is just sort of pie in the sky, really. And even if every single flat that's built, you know, from the date the statute comes into force is under these auspices. Everything that went before won't be, and there'll be just millions of leases that have still got the same issues.
Yeah, and I think what you don't want to be political about these things because it's people's lives and things, but one of the problems that I've had with housing policy generally, and as you mentioned, Michael Gove came in and he made all the right noises, a few things he said, and you think, great, it sounds quite promising. But they change the housing ministers like I change my socks.
Yeah.
You know, so they come and go. So it clearly isn't really an absolute priority with the government because they chop and change them every 5 minutes. And you know, one minister gets his brief, he gets into it, he comes up with some ideas, and he's gone. And then someone else comes in, and he's got, or her, they have their own agendas. I mean, they change them every 5 minutes. So there's nobody who's actually getting the teeth into the problem, sticking with it, and actually doing something, as you say, to bring the developers to the table and say, right, this is what we want you to do. This is, and if you don't do it, and I'd have them on a time penalty. If it's not done by then, these penalties are kicking in. It's been like 4 years now since Grenfell, 4.5 years. I mean, it is outrageous. But I don't want to get on my political soapbox because that's not what we're here for.
No, but it's interesting. It's really, you know, it is interesting and it's important, and it's, you know, it's part of the world within which we all work. At the end of the day, you know, you can't help but you know, you can't help get sort of political with a small p, I think, Maurice, sometimes. And I think it's one of the things that Stu and I have found, I think, doing Conveyancing Matters for over a year now, is actually having an opinion, having some thoughts, having some strong feelings. Stu, I think, is, you know, it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, no one likes to sit on the fence, do they?
And lots of people do.
There's always a balance. There's always a balance, isn't there? You know, you've got to be constructive with it. But I completely agree with Maurice. And you know, these things have been left far too long. Haven't, you know, the magnitude of Grenfell, the magnitude of it, and the visual effects of it that we all saw, seems crazy to me that we're even having this conversation now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think sometimes when things are on paper, it's different, but when you see that something so visual like that, you would have thought that by now we wouldn't be having this conversation, but there you go.
Can I throw something in here, Stuart? A little curveball, Lorraine, for what is your view, Stuart, on how are conveyancers approaching 2022? Because we have still found towards the end of this year, with now the numbers have dropped, the transactions, and they are dropping, you would hope that things are returning back to a little bit of parity and normality. We're still finding an awful lot of problems with conveyancers. And you know, firms that we've worked with, you know, we've had some right running still that they're still claiming that they're short staffed, they've got a backlog, they're not speaking to, you know, clients or agents, the same sort of problems we've had. Now, you know, we gave a little bit of latitude during the lockdown and whatever, because it was incredible, but it's not going to be as busy. There's no way, the numbers are going to drop because of the number of house sales. I think,
Maurice, what you're saying is exactly right, but there's real rationale behind why conveyancers are still busy. And what people often forget is that the focus is very much on, you know, from when we start the conveyancing process to completion. But of course, it doesn't end there. We still have months after completion where we have to conclude formalities such as, you know, stamp duty returns, such as registrations. And with the land registry and the backlog they have at the moment, all law firms will still be absolute manic in terms of their post-completion department and finishing the back end of all those transactions that are still hanging over from September. So you've got that. But I also think as well, you know, historically in conveyancing, two big peaks were always Easter and Christmas. You know, people always want to get in before Christmas, that sort of boring conversation, you know, why would people move on Christmas Eve? But Christ, everybody wants to. So you've actually had this year in terms of conveyancing, we normally have two peaks, but we've had the aborted March SDLT holiday deadline. We then had Easter, we had June, we had September, and of course we have Christmas. So we've got sort of 5 peaks. And you're quite right with your description of the market in terms of, well, whether it be from the estate agency point of view or conveyancing, it's like an absolute mass roller coaster. So we're up, so we're down. You've also got to factor in from a business point of view, and I don't know whether this is similar in a estate agency or not, but the first sort of 6 months of 2021, people couldn't really do anything. So people had lots of holiday that weren't taken. We had holiday, for example, here that we allowed staff to roll on from 2020. So people move into 2021 with the biggest holiday allowance they've ever had, can't use it front end of the year. We then say, no, you can't have any holiday in June. Can I have holiday in September? No, you can't have any holiday in September. So guess what? You've got most of, lawyers and law firms probably have their staff trying to take almost like a year's worth of holiday in probably October, November, December, which is already a busy time again. Adding to that, COVID is still about. So you've still got people that are having to isolate, that could be ill, blah, 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 blah. So it's still that kind of perfect storm that's ongoing. And I said sort of before we came on air, what I really wanted from Father Christmas was an absolute line to be drawn on the whole thing from 2021. And let's move into 22 with kind of stability in the workplace. And what I meant by that is no roller coaster, just a nice level playing field would be lovely, where we could have a look through some contract packs, do some exchanges, do some completions. What we didn't want is 100 completions one week and then hardly any the next, loads of exchanges one day. And that's what's kind of creating the problems, peaks and troughs. And we're still in that that scenario. I think conveyancing practices are still in that world. And I don't think that's going to change until after this year ends, and hopefully going forward next year, you might see some change then, I think.
Yeah, I suspect by the end of Q1 next year, when the levels, of volume of sales will not be the same because of the lack of instructions, maybe things will get back to a little bit of stability and parity. And I think we'd all like, as you say, to see just a bit more consistency, less up, down, peaks and troughs. It doesn't serve any, it doesn't help anybody when you get.
I think sometimes people get confused with conveyancing and businesses in general, but it's all the same thing. To run any law firm, okay, you're still running a business, and it doesn't help anybody where you can't financially plan or practically plan for what's going to happen. So who knows? Maybe we're going to be in another lockdown, and then we're going to have to sort of change working procedures again, and we're going to have to go back to doing something different. I got an interesting stat from our IT man only last week that we now have more laptops in the practice than we do sort of actual, old-fashioned sort of computers. And we've got over 100 laptops in this year. We've bought over 100, so not including what we had from 2020. You think, wow. I can remember where I think we had 2 or 3 across the practice, and that's only 2-3 years ago. So things are still changing, and I think at the moment, until there's stability probably in the world, you're going to find very fluctuating service levels in terms of conveyancing, and not to mention that also people's expectations are still at a high. We've not come out of that. Expectation levels from clients and dare I say agents as well are still really, really, really high. And of course, we're in this sort of scenario now, aren't we, where we've spoken about things like the Amazon effect, where people want everything yesterday. But from an estate agency point of view and from a client point of view, if you want to sell or buy, once you've found that, bang, 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 sold it straight away. Okay.
And this is the thing. Yeah, absolutely. And when we
and then we've got mass conveyancing process, which will take a few months. So bam, bam, sold it, done. Right, okay. And now we've got to wait 3 months, 4 months for the conveyancing to go through. So we're still a victim of that, I think, in a way as well.
Well, I think that's an important point, isn't it? Because that's when, and again, Maurice, Stu and I have talked about this a lot in the last 12 months, the point at which, estate agents should be helping to manage clients' expectations sort of, dare I say, more effectively in terms of the conveyancing process. I completely accept your point about service. I'm not in any way trying to say that conveyancers haven't got their job to do. Of course they have, but Stu said, you sell it really quickly and there's still the conveyancing process to go through. But also in terms of just general workflow, and just to add to what Stu said, Maurice, and actually linking to what you said earlier, this whole situation that we've been in for the last 18 months has led lots of people to reevaluate, and there's been an absolute hemorrhage of people doing conveyancing work out of conveyancing, and they've gone off and buggered off and done something else, and quite frankly, why would they? And recruitment is a big concern, you know, across my social media feed all the time, because obviously it's mostly property people. I see people are just advertising and trying to hire all the time, and actually trying to get staff to do the conveyancing work is proving really difficult.
I agree, and you know, as I say, I've learned a lot this year from a conveyancing point, from you guys in particular as well. You know, we've spoken about it, Lorraine, and you know, I understand it more now from the conveyancer's point of view. I still think a lot could communicate better off the issues like Stuart's just explained there. But you know, it would be. I still think there is and I don't know how, there is an education issue here still with agents and solicitors, and this unnecessary conflict that it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
You know, we're all on the same side at the end of the day. And I think there is an education issue.
There's also a balance to this issue, though, isn't there? Because what other agents might say is, well, frankly, I don't care about conveyancers' problems. That's for your industry to sort out. So I think there's a balance. You know, we can't still plead poor conveyancers, but there is a balance to be had. But that is what I've sort of described the rationale behind, I think, why we as an industry find ourselves where we are. On top of that, Lorraine and I have discussed many times before the abuse now that a property lawyer will receive. And, you know, from a work satisfaction point of view, so many people have left the industry over the last few years that actually recruiting staff is impossible. You know, you've got to really train from within if you want volume staff. And with the people that have left, yeah, actually having people to process, you know, the work in the first place is a real challenge for us as an industry. And you put all of this in one big box, and it makes it almost impossible.
Yeah, I agree.
Like I say, that's just our problem as an industry, isn't it? It shouldn't really reflect on estate agents, and it shouldn't really reflect on clients.
No.
But I've always been a massive advocate for more education in terms of, you know, where it comes from, because people still have a misplaced thought on how long things will take, and there is still a very big emphasis on sell at all costs from a certain type of estate agent, more the online model, I would say, rather than the traditional one like yourselves, whereby they want to sell conveyancing services to make commission, and they will tell the client basically anything that they want to hear. So, you know, will it go?
But does that lead us, Stu? Does that lead us, perhaps being the last major topic we'll chat to Maurice about, but does that lead us into simplify? I think it probably does, doesn't it? I mean,
that was a very neat segue there, I have to say.
Was it? It's almost as if we planned this, Maurice, isn't it? It's almost as if Stuart and I know what we're talking about.
I'm not sure about that. But I think that, you know, there are a lot of estate agents that will tell the clients, yeah, I'll be done in 5 or 6 weeks. And you find that really, really, really annoying, because, you know, there's just no rationale behind it whatsoever. Don't get me wrong, if it was a specific transaction and you've asked a conveyancer and they've given you that information, then fair play. But, you know, surely every estate agent would now know that you're talking 3 months at best. Surely. And it's funny, isn't it, how we all moan about each other and everything else. And I don't want to come across as moan about a lot of estate agents, but there is a massive proportion that we deal with that will still tell the client incorrect information in terms of how long it takes. And then that, of course, it sets the wrong expectation right from the start. And then you've got that road you've all got to go down. But
yeah, 100%. I totally agree. You know, you should set the agenda right from the outset. And, you know, we say to people, and you can see the faces, they're not very happy about it, but I will say to people, you know, you can expect, that's why we want you to get market ready now, do things early, do a lot of the preparation work right from the outset, because you can save a little bit of time once you find a buyer by doing all that early. But an average sale is probably 16 to 20 weeks. I mean, 60, you know, but it is, you know, that's the reality at the moment. And there's no point saying to somebody it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks and then it's double that, because you've built an expectation that's totally unrealistic.
Well, actually, it reflects back on the person saying that, I think, Maurice, really, doesn't it? But
of course it does.
I totally disagree. I've got to put you on that point. I disagree. I don't think it reflects at all. I think that's the problem. It doesn't reflect
well,
at all
yeah,
on the
yeah, I see
people
what
that
you mean.
says it. What it reflects on, it reflects on the bad conveyancer that they're taking so long. And that's where we go back to the educational side of things. And if you look at the guide that, you know, the home buying and selling guide that the government have produced, you know, I'd like to see a bit more emphasis on how long things take and the reasons they take so long. And that to be publicised so that, you know, maybe lawyers and other people, agents, so everybody has another central point they can go to. So rather than Maurice have to say it's going to take this long and the client be disappointed and maybe sort of, you know, frown at Maurice, maybe he could then produce, you know, go to a government website that contains all the information about how long things take. So look, it's not us. Look, you know, this is a you know, an average across England how long things take. So I think from that point of view, it would help us all if we had something more, you know, more education in terms of what people have to do and how long it takes. I think that'd help us all.
Yeah, maybe I should have said it should reflect on the people saying it when they're talking to nonsense. But so let's conclude then by talking just briefly about the simplify thing, because of course that, you know, rather awfully and terribly, both I think for the people working there and for their clients, and everybody involved in those chains, obviously links both the conveyancers, I think, and the agents, Maurice, because of course, you know, the referral fees has turned into a you know, a very central and large hot potato in that scenario. And just, you know, for anybody that's been in a cave for the last sort of few weeks, you know, simplifies the big conveyancing chain that links a lot of conveyancing brands, a particular end of the market. They've had a massive problem. We don't know the details. There's a criminal investigation going on. And, you know, they've got a very, very big percentage of the conveyancing market. They take a lot of referrals from some of the big online agencies. They've got a particular conveyancing model. They've clearly had a massive IT issue. And, you know, for the benefit of anybody watching, we're not raking up old news, because despite the fact this hit, you know, at least a month ago, it's still very much an ongoing issue. They've not resolved it completely yet, and it's had a big impact. And I'm interested to know, Maurice, whether that's, you know, whether you've had any experience of that, whether it's impacted on change you're involved in. A lot of those organisations are based in your part of the country. How's, you know, what's been the effect on the market as far as you can see?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, obviously, I didn't think I'd find myself leaping to the defence of my online competitors here. But, you know, obviously, it's an incredibly difficult situation, and there is an ongoing police criminal investigation. So you've got to be careful what you say, or you don't want to jeopardise the ongoing investigation. But clearly, there has been a huge problem. We have chains with certain online firms all the time, and it has caused problems. It's delaying situations. It's not ideal, and it just shows the problems that can, you know, with technology, despite, you know, the fact we all use technology, when it goes wrong to the extent it's gone wrong here, it has caused a huge ripple across the market. And, you know, it's Purple Bricks have had a pretty tough 12 months, and that was just another, you know, sort of situation that they could probably have well done without. But yeah, it has had effects on some of the chains that we're involved with. And I'm sure right across the country, it's just added fuel to the, you know, the stressful situations that they found themselves in.
Yeah, I think so. Stu, what about you?
Oh, Joe, I hate to comment on this because I just feel so bad for some of the people that are involved there, because you know, it's obviously something that, you know, when we look at IT and cyber attacks, it is something that is out of your control. For it to go on as long as it has just sort of shows you the significance of the issue they've got there. From a practical point of view, we've seen sort of transactions now completing and exchanging. I think initially where they weren't completing, that was really, really disastrous. But we've now seen chains sort of exchanging and completing, which is good. It's just the middle part now. And of course, what's going to happen for those that didn't, that were delayed? You know, we've got sort of clients that potentially have mounting costs in that respect, but we'll have to see how it all comes out in the wash.
Yeah, Maurice, it's interesting. Stu actually because Stu and I did a chat about this particular issue a week or two ago. And we very much are in the there but for the grace of God go all of us camp, really, in terms of the IT issues. I mean, anybody that's sort of chatting on, you know, and rabbiting on social media about isn't IT terrible and let's all go back to paper is just completely missing the point. I think I've always, you know, my whole view on conveyancing has always been it doesn't matter what you do, you are just shifting the risk, and it's up to people in organizations to assess those risks. If you go from one business model, i.e. paper, to another, i.e., you know, IT based, and clearly we're all going that way, should all have gone that way by now, you are just moving the risk. It's just a different type of risk. I think anybody that's sort of pointing the finger, you know, forgets how damaging fire and water can be if you happen to have everything piled up in a filing cabinet. But Stu and I were saying, well, you know, and a very perceptive point I think Stu made is if you look at the problems that an outfit like the Simplify Group have got, when you think of the amount of money they've got to throw at it, and they're still having these problems, you know, imagine what the situation would be for smaller outfits, really.
Yeah.
You know.
No, absolutely. I do sympathise on this particular matter because, it's outside anybody's control, and hopefully it does seem, Stuart says, to be slowly they're getting it sorted, and I'm sure they're working overtime to get it sorted.
When you look at tech, though, isn't it? You know, you can't blame the tech. There's still human user. There's still human error that goes with tech, isn't there? So it's easy to sort of jump up and down about modern tech and risks and stuff like that, but it's a lot of it still involves people using it.
100%.
And that's where it can go wrong.
Well, it's interesting in the money laundering guidance that came out, 200 pages of it or so came out in January 2021, as if conveyancers didn't have enough to think about at that time. One of the things that buried in all of this guidance that they sort of pointed out, which you think, gosh, they felt the need to put this in there, is with all of the sort of online AML checks and everything else that we can all do, at the end of the day, firms have still got to have something in place to make sure the person inputting the client's name gets it right. So that's just a tiny but really quite, salient point about all of this. You've still got people actually putting the content in. And funnily enough, I was locuming not that long ago, and just before I'm about to exchange, if it's a file I haven't had any involvement with, I always do a review of the file just to make sure at least the headline points are sorted. And we had a couple of AML checks on file, and the client's names were spelt wrongly. And I was literally on the verge of exchanging, and I said to the people working sort of, with me, do it again. And they were, what? We're just about to exchange. So we're not exchanging without a clear AML search, and this name's wrong. The name's not been put in right. You go, oh God, Anyway, well, Maurice, just delightful to see you again. So maybe just to conclude, perhaps your last big thought on what do we hope for 2022? Let's not predict because that's too difficult. What are we hoping for?
I'm with Stuart on this. I'd like some stability. I don't want the boom and bust that we've had this year.
Yeah.
I don't think it is good for the market. I don't think it's good for people. I think I'd like to see an end to coronavirus first and foremost, or at least we learn to live with it however we do, and we can get back to some form of proper normality. Transaction levels from a business point of view to be consistent throughout the year, a steady number of houses, house price inflation kept to reasonable levels so people can adjust with that, and I think stability. That is what I would use as my byword for 2022.
Oh, well, that's fantastic, Maurice. Well, I suspect this might not be the last time you join us, so Stu and I would really, really like to thank you for taking the time out to come and chat to us. As ever,
not at all. Really
interesting to talk to you again. And you boys have managed not to mention football once. So thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'm
not at all. The time's
pleased.
flown, mate. Delighted. Lovely to see you. Have a fantastic Christmas, both of you. And no doubt we'll be speaking via social media, and hopefully we'll catch up again in the new year.
I'm sure we will. Take care, Maurice.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys. See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.